Thank you and good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can see me clearly. So actually, Vanessa is also part of our organization, the Ateneo Center for Organization Research and Development, which is a center under the Psychology Department of the Ateneo de Manila University. So this symposium will present studies conducted by our center, the Ateneo Cord, regarding the attitudes of Filipino workers and their experiences amid COVID-19. So what we will be presenting are studies that use qualitative approaches that captured not just actually the experiences and attitudes, but also the expectations and roles of employees, leaders, and managers in the Philippines. So the first study explored the experiences of work-life balance among married and single employees approximately 1 year after the onset of the pandemic in the country, and that will be presented by Mr. Rae Mark Zantua. The second study will look into the work attitudes of Filipinos at the occurrence phase of the COVID-19 pandemic. That paper or that research will be presented by Mr. Arnold Policarpio. The third study pertains to the leadership experiences or perceptions of effective leadership in organizations amid COVID-19, the COVID-19 crisis. And this one will be presented by Ms. Mikee Talamayan. And finally, I will present our study on the experiences of human resource management practitioners in the emergent phase of a global crisis using the phenomenological approach. So we have video recorded our presentations. We will play the videos one after the other. So please take note of your questions and we'll give space for that after the video presentations. Thank you. So my colleague RM will share the video.
I'm RM Zantua from the Ateneo de Manila University and the Ateneo Center for Organization Research and Development. Today, I'm presenting to you our study on examining the work-life balance of married and single employees during the COVID-19 crisis. My co-authors here are Dr. Tony Rose Mactal, Dr. Feliz Caringalgo, Dr. Joy Teng-Calleja, and Dr. Erwin De La Paz. In our paper, work-life balance is defined as being essential in enhancing an individual and organization's productivity. We know that work-life balance enhances job performance and organizational pride, and that work-life conflict diminishes job satisfaction and self-reported health among working adults. We discovered during our search that COVID-19 pandemic really changed the work-life balance. Work from home had different challenges, especially for those living with children and those who have to do household chores. Although this happens, working from home also provides greater flexibility in the work arrangements and the removal of the need to commute, which came out as a big theme during our search. While there are studies talking about work-life balance and how it has changed during the COVID-19, we saw that there's a dearth in studies that looked at the different contextual factors that impact work-life balance during this pandemic. In our study, we decided to focus on the marital status of different employees and how it impacted work-life balance. On the screen, you can see that there are different domains that married individuals find important and what single employees find important. On the top, there's family for both married and single individuals, but you can see that there are different priorities going down the list. Married individuals look more at personal care and friends, while single employees look at their hobbies first before anything else. So we would like to reiterate that household structures must be taken into consideration when formulating work-life balance support initiatives in the workplace. In our study, we wanted to answer these questions. 1, are there changes in an employee's work-life balance 1 year into the COVID-19 pandemic? 2, what contributes to the increase or decrease of work-life balance among single employees? And 3, what contributes to the increase or decrease of work-life balance among married employees. A little background on the study. Our participants are 127 employees, age range 20 to 68. We only sent our survey to working adults, so we won't have any minors here. 45% of our sample are married and 55% of our sample are single employees. When we collect the data, we decided to use purposive sampling. We sent this survey out using our center's mailing list and social media. So once it was out there, we asked people to share and answer online. This online survey asked people to rate their work-life balance prior to the COVID-19 pandemic and during the COVID-19 pandemic, and allowed them space to expound on their answers. When we analyze the data, we use a mixed method approach. We use a quantitative strategy, paired t-test to see the differences, and topic modeling using latent Dirichlet allocation. We also use qualitative strategies like utterance analysis that I will be explaining in the next slides. So to answer our first question, are there changes in an employee's work-life balance 1 year into the pandemic? Yes. We can see before people rated their work-life balance at a mean of 7.4, and there is a significant change during the pandemic now. Our table shows here that single employees reported a decrease in their work-life balance during this pandemic, much more than those who reported they increased their work-life balance. So we want to see now what contributes to the decrease among single employees. Our analysis showed 3 major themes: overlapping work and personal spaces, dwindling time for social life, and the converging working hours and personal time. So in the overlapping work and personal spaces, people talked about level of stress, their family, their stress, and how it's confusing to not have the boundaries there. In dwindling time for social life, people talk about the limited interactions and the limited time they can connect with their friends. If you remember, this is for single employees, so their priority is still their friends. We'd also like to look at what contributed to the decrease of work-life balance among married employees. So, similar to our single employees, the blurring of the boundaries between work and family is one of the major themes that we called out. We're also looking at them detaching from work. This is a sample quote from this theme. And we also see that the merging of family and work activities contributed a lot to the decrease of work-life balance. Now we want to look at what contributed to the increase of work-life balance among married employees. And the main theme for everything is spending more family time. This is supported by the reduced travel time and the presence of family with family during this COVID time. So what it's really just saying is that work-life balance is made higher by allowing married employees to work from home. It reduces travel time, especially here in the Philippines, where traveling from your home to your place of work would take you at least 1 hour, 2 hours, and that's a lot of time spent on the road and not with your family or not doing work. Work from home arrangements also allowed our married employees to stay with their families more, and have more time just bonding with their children or their spouses. All right, so what does our research imply? This implies that organizations have to think about remote work arrangements and how this would affect single employees and married employees differently. So it's useful for them to conceptualize and implement guidelines that still look at how people want to do their work and what kind of work they are looking to do. So Our research also would like to guide the formulation of different support systems in the form of work-life balance and work-from-home programs and trainings that will involve family members. Future studies may want to broaden the scope of our research though. Since our research is very limited, we only got to ask people in the Philippines. We might also want to look at different locations and how different cultures tackle work-life balance and work-from-home arrangements. We would also like to look at, in future studies, different gender roles, family roles, and their position and rank in the organization, as we think this might have a difference in how they perceive our work from home arrangements. So all of these can offer a more nuanced understanding of what determinants of work-life balance are and how these differ between groups. Other research directions may also want to look at the longitudinal approach, as we've only really asked this at a single point of time. All right. Thank you again. Salamat. If you have any questions, I am very willing to answer them at the end of this presentation. Thank you.
Good day, everyone. My name is Arnold Policarpio, and I'm here to discuss our research about work attitudes of Filipino employees 1 year into the COVID-19 pandemic. So given the sudden shift to the pandemic, we came up with the following research question. So first, how has employee work attitudes evolved a year into the COVID-19 pandemic? Second, what are reported employee behaviors that relate to these evolving attitudes? So in order to determine this, we use the social cognitive theory of triadic reciprocal determinism. So basically, this discusses that these three constructs are all interconnected and determine each other. So basically, first is the interpersonal factors. So this includes conceptions, beliefs, self-perceptions, and for the behavior, so basically this is the action a person does. And lastly, environment, or the imposed physical and sociocultural conditions that limit the scope of an individual. So in this study, the COVID-19 pandemic is a major influence on the environment and is the primary context that individuals in the study moved in. So in relation to our research question, the study aims to contribute to a broader understanding of how employee attitudes, a pandemic-imposed environment, and work behavior influence one another. For our research setting, the study was conducted here in the Philippines 1 year into the COVID-19 pandemic. In terms of our participants, we were able to gather 105 participants. So these are employees who have been with their organizations for at least 6 months at the time of the survey. Their age ranged from 20 to 68 years old, with an average age of 38 years old. In terms of our data collection and analysis, so we asked our respondents to describe in what ways their attitudes towards work have changed 1 year into the pandemic. So we used Brown and Clark's 6-step thematic analysis for the data collection and analysis. And to ensure validity, we did several rounds of intercoding with our team members. As a result, we came up with the following themes. So themes under the affect and cognitive domain include adaptability, openness to or viability of work from home arrangements, demotivation, difficulties of remote work, burnout, gratitude for a continued employment, increased appreciation of work, and prioritizing well-being. These are then matched to behavioral domains such as assertion for better work conditions, change of outlook, increased commitment and productivity, self-improvement, immersed in work, and finally, achieving work-life balance. So basically, for every affect cognitive construct, there's a corresponding behavior associated to it. So we color-coded each affect cognitive to match their behavior. Each one has their own color-coded counterparts except for the openness to work from home arrangements. Starting with adaptability. So adaptability talks about being open and understand that if we learn to be more flexible and adapt, any goal can be achieved regardless of circumstance. Others also mentioned that the pandemic was an invaluable learning process for them. The behavioral domain under this is assertion for better work conditions. So basically, this talks about better pay and better working conditions and even work setup. Change of outlook, basically the person's mindset, the belief that we all have different coping mechanisms when facing the pandemic. It's followed by the openness to or viability of work from home management. So basically, the realization that even at home, work can still be accomplished. That task can be done even in work from home setup. Next is the motivation. So under the motivation, others mentioned that they feel it's more of just survival now, just barely getting through the day. Next is difficulties of remote work. This talks about challenges people encounter working from home. Then followed by burnout. So under burnout, some of their responses were before work, work was just one facet of my life. However, after some time, they felt as if their life was consumed by it. Thus, the feeling of being burned out. The match behavioral domain under this is decreased commitment and productivity. This includes doing the bare minimum, so basically just meeting the expectations and not exerting any more effort. Next is the gratitude for continued employment. So while others feel burnout and demotivated, there are others who were grateful for retaining their jobs and value the jobs they currently have. So given that a lot of people are being laid off during the pandemic, a lot of people are also grateful for having their jobs with them. So the behavioral counterpart of this is self-improvement. So basically, continually honing their current skill sets and competencies to further improve and be better. So another is the increased appreciation of work. So they became more enthusiastic towards their work assignments and or challenges that they address collaboratively with their teammates or colleagues. So as a result, the behavioral counterpart is they became immersed in work. They became more involved in the task assigned to them. And finally, prioritizing well-being. Others mentioned the importance of boundaries, specifically between work and life. They realized that there's more to life than just work, such as family, such as their hobbies, etc. So others also realized the importance of rest as an essential part of productivity. So the behavioral domain associated to this is achieving work-life balance. So this basically means having a delineation between work and life in general by accepting the challenges, pressures, and stress, but not questioning one's own existence. And now for practical implication. So organizations may use these findings to formulate programs and policies considering the evolution caused by the pandemic. So on behalf of our research team, thank you so much for listening and have a nice day.
Good day, everyone. I am Mikee Talamayan, and I'm here to present our study on effective leadership in organization during the COVID-19 crisis, an example from the Philippines. So, in the past 2 years, we have seen the importance of leadership roles in handling crisis. Undeniably, we can observe a variety of qualities and behaviors that are helpful during the crisis. So, the purpose of this study is to identify leadership behaviors that employees deem helpful for the organization and for the workforce approximately 1 year after the first onset of the pandemic in the Philippines. This will allow us to provide a more current picture of effective crisis leadership in our local context. And to guide our study, we use the three meta categories of leadership. These are the task-oriented leadership, relation-oriented leadership, and change-oriented leadership. So why this theory or framework? Actually, in the literature, these meta-categories were found helpful during the crisis. However, as we all know, context is very important. Given that most of the studies were conducted in the West, And knowing that the Philippines have a collectivist culture, we're interested to know the nuance or if that affects the employee's preference. So, a wealth of studies have shown that these qualities are helpful when dealing with crisis. In a recent study, it is found that the compassion, care, and supportive behavior were found as the most effective qualities of crisis leaders. However, the data were collected during the early phase of crisis. Now we want to know if the effective leadership qualities from the perspective of employees changed 1 year after the onset of the pandemic. The research context is that crisis is very important because as we go through the crisis, there are different phases. It is a sequence of sub-events that have the potential to bring considerable damage and interruption to organization. Especially in our context, every 15 days the protocol is changing, the alert level is also changing, and these changes may affect how leaders will lead their organization. And our study is actually situated when we are between the occurrence and aftermath phase, given that restrictions have somewhat loosened with a bit surges in local areas that causes restriction for a period of time. To provide more context, the current research was conducted in the Philippines approximately 1 year after the declaration of COVID-19 on March 2020. A year, later, a year later, community quarantines of varying intensities were still being implemented in different cities and provinces due to the presence of other COVID-19 variants. Also, this current study is part of a follow-up study by a university-based Center for Organization Research and Development on the impact of COVID-19 on organization and employees. To get the perspective of employee, we gather data utilizing snowball sampling from 128 Filipino employees. They should be employed in their organization for at least 6 months with an average age of 13 years old. And the average tenure of our participants is 7 years. The sample also came from different industries such as human health, social work, education, financial field, admin support services, IT, manufacturing, professionals, and government were among others. The qualitative data from 120 employees were gathered through an online survey and subjected to content analysis. In the survey, we asked what traits or behavior do your leaders exhibit that are helpful to you and effective for the organization at this point of crisis. Themes, which include a mix of traits and behaviors, were generated, and then we group it into the leadership meta-categories following the definition of Ukel and colleagues. To ensure the validity of the analysis, the data were analyzed independently by two individual researchers who then intercoded and agreed on the themes and subthemes. And this was presented to other three researchers for further refinement. Frequency counts were also computed for each of the themes to see which of the leadership categories were most cited. As a result, findings show that is still the relationship-oriented leadership that is most effective quality of a leader during the crisis. What's interesting is that a fourth meta-category emerged from the data, which is the influence-oriented. Later on, I'll be sharing the behavior under this meta-category, but first, we will see the result of the other categories. First, for the relationship-oriented, we have the following themes: emotional support, communicating, relationship focused, instrumental support, empowering, and consulting. Of course, in a crisis where feelings of anxiety and stress may be high, employer regarded their leaders' ability to provide emotional support as essential. According to them, leaders who demonstrate compassion, patience and empathy and give leeways to the deadlines are helpful and shows that the leaders understand the situation of their employees. Aside from that, I would like to highlight here the communicating that is relation focused. According to the participant, they find it helpful and effective if their leaders display the ability to relate with them as individuals. For the second meta category, the task oriented, themes under this were communication, information focus, flexibility, responsiveness, decisiveness, managing and organizing, and monitoring operations and performance. So here the communication is information focused, meaning employees find it helpful if leaders remain in constant contact and share valuable information related to work. Others are more straightforward, and all of these characterize how well the leaders were able to lead them in terms of work or task. The fourth meta category, which is the influence oriented, have the themes of transparency, positivity, and role modeling. So it is the capacity of the leader to have an effect on the character or development or behavior of their employees. According to the participants, if their leaders are honest on the things that are not working well and they are informed on what needs to be improved to keep the organization afloat, this keep the employee well informed and they find it helpful. They are not blinded on the status as well of their employment. Under change-oriented leadership was adaptability. For employees, it is critical that their leaders are able to study and prepare early, especially for the changes. They find it helpful if leaders are visionary and adaptable and have a sense of commitment to look for options for shared survival. Therefore, this finding is consistent with the claims of recently published studies on the importance of caring, empathic, compassionate, and person-oriented leadership amid this global health crisis. Essential to providing emotional support are the efforts of leaders to engage in relation-focused communication that participants valued relatively more than information-focused. This again highlights the importance of person-oriented leadership. What's noteworthy is the emergence of the fourth meta category, which is the influence-oriented. Again, this is characterized by transparency, positivity, and role modeling. Indeed, establishing mutual trust through authenticity and transparency has been highlighted as part of the best practices for leaders during a crisis. Especially in leader-centric societies such as Philippines, employees look at their leader for guidance on how to react and behave in times of great risk and uncertainty. These influence-oriented behaviors give assurance to employees that they have a trusted ally that they can rely on, that gives them hope that the company can survive the challenges. For the practical implications, so this study will provide information so that organization can leverage on leaders' influence, encourage demonstration of effective leadership, and enable constant interaction with employees, program, and activities. Also, this will allow the organization to check if they have leadership assessment, gathering and giving feedback from multiple stakeholders, and also coaching. This will help them increase self-awareness and self-mastery. And with that, this is the end of our presentation on behalf of our research team, Dr. Calleja, Dr. Mactal, Dr. Carinalgo, and Dr. Franco, and RM. Thank you everyone and have a good day.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm here to present a study conducted with Dr. Feliz Caringalgo and Dr. Emerald Ilac that used phenomenology as a theoretical lens in examining the experiences of human resources management practitioners during COVID-19. As we already know, COVID-19 has impacted the workplace in unimaginable ways, requiring organizations and employees to implement operational changes concerning many aspects of work. These experiences highlighted the valuable contributions of human resource management or the HR function during periods of crisis. So this study shows how HR practitioners contributed to the sustainability of their organizations and draws insights on how HR can put the needed focus on the human side of organizational crisis management efforts amid a global health crisis. So the study used phenomenology as a framework to examine the experiences of these HR practitioners, particularly during the first 2 months of the pandemic. Phenomenology allows for the exploration and deeper understanding of how we live through and make sense of various situations that we encounter in our lives. This specific mode of inquiry captures people's lived experience from direct personal narratives, which are then integrated to come up with the universal essence of the phenomenon. So in this study, this is reflected in the process of gathering actual accounts of individual HR practitioners during the COVID-19 crisis and examining the data to determine their shared experiences of the phenomenon. So using phenomenology as lens, we sought answers to questions pertaining to challenges experienced by organizations and employees during the first few months of the COVID-19 pandemic, HR's contributions in organizational efforts to respond to the challenges experienced at the emergent phase of the crisis, and how HR managers made sense of these experiences. So we conducted online semi-structured interviews with 11 HR managers from April to May 2020. We asked these questions during the interviews and used Willig's three-step approach in conducting phenomenological analysis. FOK that involved suspension of all preconceived thoughts and experiences by the researchers to be able to look at the data as it was shared by the HR practitioners. This is important as we ourselves engage in HR consulting work. So this was followed by phenomenological reduction, which captured what was experienced by the participants, and finally, imaginative variation, which entailed looking at the various factors and conditions that enable the experiences. The sharing of the HR managers focused on the difficulties experienced by the organizations and employees at the onset of the COVID-19 crisis and how they, as an HR unit, responded to these challenges. So as seen in this figure, immediate and efficient HR actions were needed in particular HR functions. So the experiences of the managers reflected HR's contribution in enabling organizational agility as well as ensuring responsiveness to employees. So the challenges observed and experienced by HR practitioners were reflective of the novelty of the crisis and the understandable unfamiliarity with COVID-19 that made it harder for organizations to immediately respond to its impact. One participant expressed that the most challenging part is addressing employee concerns that you are not prepared for and have not yet encountered in the past. All their organizations had to immediately transition to a work from home setup upon the imposition of the nationwide lockdown in the Philippines in March 2020. But there was also a lack of readiness for online work, which appeared to be the only way to continue operations due to quarantine restrictions. Another participant noted how his organization was pretty much traditional. They did not have a precedent for working from home, so everyone was really struggling. Budgets were very tight, not just because the business wasn't performing well, but because there are no people, to process the budgets. The efforts to enable the shifts in mindsets and behaviors needed for remote work were challenged by the lack of familiarity with technological tools and the intermittent Internet connectivity in the Philippines, no? So having technical issues, delay, and lag time in our internet connections. The pandemic also differentiated organizational roles that have to be done on site. Employees occupying these positions faced particular challenges. So with the growing number of COVID-19 cases at that time, people were scared and did not want to go to work. For employees who were willing to go to the office, travel restrictions served as a major roadblock. One participant remembered how public transportation was suspended, so most of their workers had a hard time commuting, some even taking 5 hours just to reach their workplace. Companies felt the financial impact of the crisis just a few days into the community quarantine. There was also widespread fear of job loss if the ECQ or the enhanced community quarantine will be extended as seen in this narrative, no, of one of the practitioners from the retail industry. So they don't know if they can sell their items, no, and operations was affected. These things, no, are very worrying for HR because they want to sustain the job, no, for their employees. If there will be less sales, there will be a big chance, no, that they will have to let go of their employees. So HR had to quickly adapt its functions and services to the emerging needs of the organization and its employees. These changes were primarily seen in workforce planning, compensation and benefits, employee well-being, performance and productivity management, employee engagement, and learning and development. One of the main tasks of HR was to ensure that there was sufficient manpower to continue operations. So after determining the jobs and the number of people that must be on site, HR had to think of various strategies to enable employees to physically report to work. This included providing accommodations and vehicles to fetch employees and bring them home. HR had to manage shifts in schedule to ensure health and safety of those reporting to work. They also had to change some roles. For example, the brand ambassadors or the selling push girls and boys in the supermarket. So since people are not going to the supermarket, what one of the managers did was to change their function. A lot of adjustments were done in benefits allocation and utilization that were within, no, the function of HR. Employees were allowed to use up their leave credits, such as vacation leaves, sick leaves. They released bonuses, no, to everyone. There were also new benefits provided to employees to encourage them to report to work. One practitioner shared that they had an incentive called frontliners allowance. No? So to enhance safety, another organization subsidized employees' use of Grab cars to discourage them from using public transportation. Medical benefits to help address COVID were also provided. Aside from ensuring continuous salaries for everyone, HR also facilitated the provision of financial and material assistance to employees. They also assisted them, no, in availing COVID-related benefits from the government. So they had to know the latest updates, not just on quarantine restrictions and number of COVID cases, but also on government support that can be availed of by employees. So while HR practitioners wanted to be responsive to the needs of employees, they had to also make sure that they consider the current realities of the organization. As expressed by one manager, we're juggling the capital released by the owner or the management and also the benefits that we can give to employees. We do not want to give all the assistance now and then make a mistake in forecasting. We might use up all the capital and cause losses to the company. For those who needed to be physically present in the workplace, support was given to ensure that they're able to safely come to work and remain productive. So aside from what were already mentioned, providing accommodations, shuttle service, and transportation funds, HR also had to provide all the needed documentation to enable mobility, such as employment certificates. So employees were also provided with tools and technology to perform their work. One manager shared how they are, repurposing jobs, and most of the interviewees shared how they help enable the needed shift in mindset, in terms of monitoring performance in remote work, particularly on what is it that leaders had to monitor, so setting the weekly objectives and priorities. Well-being was also enhanced by providing protective materials such as care packages. vitamin C, masks, hand sanitizer, cleaning materials, etc. HR also initiated rearrangement of the office setup and had implemented policies and guidelines to ensure safety. This included putting a footpath and requiring people to have a change of clothes every day when they go to the office. Measuring each room to determine maximum capacity, and setting up sanitation booths, creating a site worker guide. So one manager shared that they needed to schedule the lunch break and the break time to manage foot traffic in the cafeteria. They also constructed dividers, so it's like you are facing a wall when you are eating. Mental health support was also provided through various means. So HR also helped ensure that employees and their families were provided with the needed medical support and other forms of assistance, like proactively sharing health-related information. So it's more important than ever to make sure that employees stay engaged, to make them feel that the company is there to care for them despite what's happening. So given this, engagement activities previously done in person were transitioned to virtual platforms. There were also new programs initiated during the quarantine. One manager talked about one of their executive vice presidents hosting a virtual party, and their interns creating a fitness video that employees can follow while they are at home. So employee communication was also enhanced through regular updates, newsletters, and messages from leaders. Although learning and development was not very much prioritized, HR thought about how they can help by offering coaching instead of formal training to their leaders and employees. So to ensure timely and appropriate response, HR had to be updated on the COVID-19 situation in the country and the government guidelines or announcements. One practitioner mentioned that he had to consistently watch the news and check what are applicable policies for their people. This allowed HR to immediately shift strategies in the way it delivers its services and to actively help the organization in scenario building. As expressed by one of the managers, creativity is needed so you can think of what can be done for the people. So contributing to organizational effort to address the immediate impact of the crisis entailed adopting new ways of efficiently communicating to various internal stakeholders, especially the employees. One manager noted how they realized that they became really resourceful when it comes to communicating. Instead of sending one email, they will send it through group chats, in social media. They had to make adjustments in communication policies and practices to make sure that HR was able to connect with employees in consideration of demographics and new ways of working. So one company used a chat bot that was lodged in SharePoint. For another organization, it's in the use of Facebook as primary communication, since most of the employees on the ground did not have an email. As in how some HR functions were delivered during the quarantine, enhancing efficiency also meant maximization of various online platforms and technologically enabled ways of working. So using Zoom, Google Hangouts, Google Forms, SQIP, Microsoft Teams, SharePoint, among others, in employee engagement and well-being, reaching out to employees to ensure that the company has the needed warm bodies to maintain operations, in managing performance and productivity, and delivering learning and development activities. So findings of the study highlighted the strategic role of HR in organizations, especially in periods of crisis. So effectively responding to the disruptions brought about by COVID required heightened sensitivity to the needs of employees and the organization. This was seen in how HR facilitated the provision of resources and work tools or equipment to employees so they can continue working, giving financial and material assistance, as well as taking care of employees' mental health, as well as engagement. So innovations in communication can also be of value to HR practitioners during crisis. Knowing what is relevant to their audience, how the message is communicated, and what means are used to communicate the message are all important facets in innovating communication strategies to maintain connectivity with all employees, regardless of whether they are working in their homes or in the office. This is an important learning that HR practitioners need to carry with them as we anticipate and prepare for the next normal. So this goes with the need to continuously embrace technological shifts and to review, update, or create business continuity and sustainability plans that considers unprecedented crises such as the COVID-19 pandemic. So the findings extend existing literature on how organizations and HR units can efficiently respond to crisis via effective communication, addressing employee psychosocial needs and other financial necessities. In doing so, HR was able to show its efficiency and agility amid the global pandemic. Future studies may explore conducting a longitudinal study that maps HR experiences through the different phases of the pandemic or the ebb and surge of COVID cases. The findings from this phenomenological study can also be used to create a survey tool to gather data from a wider sample and from varying contexts. The survey may relate the HR initiatives to employee attitudes such as organizational commitment, turnover intent, or organization citizenship behaviors, as well as organizational outcomes such as perceived organizational performance, resilience, and sustainability. Thank you for listening, and I hope that you were able to gain a greater appreciation of both human resource management practice and the use of phenomenology as a lens in qualitative studies. Okay, thank you for listening, everyone. So we now open the floor for questions. There's one question in the chat, actually. What do you mean by increase or decrease in work balance, and which is more desirable? I think this is directed to Mr. R.M. Zantua, our first presenter. R.M.
All right, ma'am. Thank you po. Thank you, Dr. Odegbe, for the question. So in our research, work-life balance refers to the employee's perception of how well they can do both work assignments and family life priorities. When we asked this in our survey, we asked our participants to rate their perceptions of their own work-life balance before and after the pandemic. This helped us establish any change that they might have in their work-life balance. So in general, we would like to have a more positive or good work-life balance in any of our studies.
Okay, thank you, RM.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify, because when you said increase or decrease in work-life balance, the direction is important, because using the word increase or decrease, I mean, decrease in the balance can be a bit confusing. So I just thought maybe a more descriptive nomenclature might be better. Just think of something else. I mean, because we know from English speaking countries, so something that'll make it easy. The tagging or the labeling is very important.
Thank you. Thank you for that suggestion. Thank you.
Sorry, I also wanted to make some points as well. I find all the presentations very interesting. I just, they shed a lot of light on aspects of work attitudes that, the skills will reveal, and a lot of things that happened during the COVID pandemic. And some of my students actually did some of the studies as well, using both qualitative and quantitative methods. I just noticed that all through the work, you had a frame to explain, to do the analysis. So some of the frames actually brought out some unique perspectives, which I found that they still kind of were hidden under the frames, the conceptual framework. Like in the first, one of the studies talked about the behavioral stroke affective component, the cognitive, affective, behavioral components, yet there were some distinct, very significant work attitudes that came out under those. And so maybe at the end could highlight the unique perspectives, new things that are not consistent, like one of the studies did, the ones that are talking about the leadership theories, talked about the task-oriented leadership, the relationship-oriented leadership, and the change-oriented leadership, and came up with a new perspective of influence influence-oriented leadership. So those kind of frames they're helpful to some extent, but sometimes they also hide some of our unique findings. Like in trying to analyze a work, if you look at the different categories of leadership, for instance, sometimes we advocate for a high task-oriented leadership behavior as well as a high relationship-oriented leadership behavior. They are not mutually exclusive. So sometimes you're supposed to exhibit high. To what extent do our analysis reveal that? In our coding, in our categorizing of this leadership characteristics, to what extent do we take care of those? How much of the variations do we find? These are some of the things that, the questions that came to my mind while the presentations were going on. And then the whole issue about contextualizing the findings. I wanted those to come out very strongly as well as the strengths, again, just like I noticed with Vanessa's presentation, the strengths of these themes, so that as practitioners, when we're working with those, we are able to suggest which ones are most important. Those are some of my comments for now. And then just generally, again, I'm saying, are we testing the frameworks or the theories or the approaches, and to what extent do our findings reveal or strengthen those frameworks, or to what extent do our findings actually refine or shift some of the suggestions in the framework? Those kind of things are the questions that came out for me from the presentations. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for those feedback, Dr. Odette. I appreciate that perspective of, let's say, of course, when we use a certain framework, the positioning or the perspective of the research shifts from a very inductive to a somewhat deductive way of categorizing data. And in two of the studies, the one on work attitudes and the one on leadership, that perspective was taken by the research groups. So, for example, in the attitudes study, so we use social cognitive theory. So, categorization of the responses then were conducted or were done according to the guidelines of that, or to the assumptions of that theory. And same thing with the leadership study, so the categorization of the data were sort of investigative, and really looking for whether the framework emerged from the findings. And from there, we realized that there's another dimension of leadership, the influence-oriented leadership that came out of the findings. So unlike, for example, the ones that were used in the work-life balance in the HR study, where it's really more inductive in nature. So phenomenology was used in the HR study, for example, and really let the themes, or the essence, of the phenomenon emerge from the stories, from the experiences of the HR practitioners. So we sort of we have chosen the standpoint and the perspective that were used in the studies, and that guided our theoretical argument, our choice of methodology, as well as analytical procedures. So maybe just on a side note, for example, in the leadership study, we did an earlier study on crisis leadership that's more inductive in nature. So we realized that when we were capturing data 1 year into the pandemic, we would want to use a different perspective, and that's why we did it in a not in a very inductive or social constructivist way, no, but more of using a framework to already organize the experience, no. So that's sort of the strategy that the research team did, no, for this series of researches, no, within our research laboratory. But in the paper, rest assured that we still highlight and capture the context, no, especially in interpreting our findings, no. So we make sure that it's contextualized in the current realities of work organizations and Filipino workers' experiences. So, but thank you. We'll really take those into consideration as we move forward with our researches in the lab, because right now organizations in the Philippines are shifting to a hybrid work mode. So again, we have another research research proposal aiming submitted to our university, aiming to capture this section of this time, or time point, as experienced by the employees and organizations in the Philippines. So
thank you. I'm sure I envy the very interesting research that you're doing. It's really very interesting.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. And I hope that there will be opportunities, for like all of us to sort of come together and really work on researches that cuts across territorial boundaries, So for example, if we want to understand hybrid work, how is it happening in the global south or in the Philippines? How is it happening in other parts of the world? And maybe we're asking the same questions, but if it's a very inductive way of doing it, then we might find varying responses based on our context.
Yeah, that would be interesting.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, there's also a question from Dr. Bayer to the last presenter. Why do you call your analysis phenomenological research, not thematic analysis, for instance? Well, the way we argued for the theoretical value of this research, as well as the analytical procedures that we followed, is really phenomenological rather than thematic. So for example, in the analytical procedures that we used, if you do thematic analysis, you can automatically dive into examining the data, But in our case, for example, before we looked at the interview data, the transcriptions, or actually even before we did the analysis, so we went through FOK, wherein we really sort of reflected on what are our own biases, experiences, etc., that might influence or affect the way we view the data, and we let ourselves be very aware that we ourselves are HR consultants, HR practitioners, and therefore there can be that aspect of bias, when we examine the data. And for example, in the Philippines, HR is not really before, not really a well-revered, respected as unit in the organization, because it's a cost center. It doesn't, earn money for the organization, because we take care of people within the organization, and that's sort of something that's at the back of our minds when we were reading the transcripts, and we have to be aware of that. That bias towards HR, this does not affect the way we see the data. So I think that's one difference, in thematic analysis and phenomenology. And there's also a deep dive into the narratives, experiences of each participant. So reading and rereading of the transcripts were really done before we even captured what they're really saying and how they make sense, how they understand their own experiences. So I hope I was able to answer your question. Okay, thank you. Any other questions for the team? Any last words from my colleagues, RM, Mikee, and Arnold?
I'd just like to thank everyone for the opportunity to share research in our papers. And I welcome all the comments. Thank you for we'll be using these moving forward when we continue our research and create our new manuscripts. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, RM. So Mike and Arnold are very quiet. So I think they're good as well. So thank you so much,
Yeah.
everyone, for listening.